Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session, Smarter Sales and Operations with Sales and Inventory and Operations Planning. My name is George Delp. I am a senior sales executive here at Stoneridge Software. I lead our Business Central sales efforts related to life sciences and food and chemical manufacturing. Joining me today is Jeffery Porter, the CMO at Stock IQ Technologies. Jeffery, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who is Stock IQ?
Yeah, thank you, George. Appreciate that warm welcome. As George noted, I am the Chief Marketing Officer, also Chief Sales Officer here at Stock IQ Technologies. A little bit about me. I have a deep background in software and manufacturing. Spent about 8 years in actually right next to a manufacturing floor where we're doing high-tech manufacturing, long lead times, a lot of issues getting product in and making sure everything aligned so that we were able to operate our business successfully. So I spent that in the last 25 plus years has been in the software business where Stock IQ as an organization, is into supply chain planning. So all of those activities that are involved in getting inventory into your distribution facility, your manufacturing facility for producing product, or selling out to your customers is everything that Stock IQ works on. It involves demand planning, inventory planning, involves replenishment planning, capacity planning, and sales and operations planning, or SIOP, as we're going to be talking about today.
Mhm. Thanks, Jeffrey. So, our agenda for today. We're going to start off with what is SIOP, or Sales Inventory and Operations Planning. And you may have heard other similar terms like S&OP, or Sales and Operations Planning. Is SIOP and SOP the same thing? Are they different? We're going to talk about that. Then we'll get into talking about exactly what is a SIOP process? What are the steps? What are the elements of a successful process? And then finally, we'll wrap things up talking about some of the roadblocks that you might encounter while deploying a SIOP process at your company. So with that, Jeffrey, our first question, let's start with the basics. What is SIOP? And what is the right way to say it? Am I saying it correct? And is it the same thing as SNOP?
Yeah, great starting point, which is, hey, what is the definition of all of this and how do we approach it? So you are pronouncing it correctly. So SIOP, and that stands for Sales, Inventory, and Operations Planning, oftentimes referred to as Sales and Operations Planning. So those are interchangeable. No real nuance to any of them. In an S&OP process, we're dealing with inventory as well. But oftentimes, in the manufacturing, when we talk about SIOP, it's really about aligning all of our processes to support whatever our sales plan or our goals and objectives are at this point. So the long definition here, and I'll go ahead and read it, and we'll kind of talk about some of the details on it, but it's really a process. It's been developed. Tactical plans provide management with the ability to strategically direct its business to achieve competitive advantage, on and on. I'm going to let you to continue on and read down through this definition. Um, I will tell you S&OP, there's another characteristic to it. It's typically performed at least once a month and is reviewed by management at an aggregate or a product family level. Um, Another key component when we start talking about SIOP or S&OP is it must be reconciled all supply, demand, and new product plans at both the detail and the aggregate levels. There's a real big component in here when we start talking about product family level. The reason that I bring this up in here is the standpoint that depending on you as a manufacturer, are you dealing with 1,000 SKUs? Are you dealing with 100? Are you dealing with 10 or 15,000? This process that we conduct on a monthly basis that we're going to getting into a little bit more detail requires us to be able to aggregate and look at things at a high level. Typically 6 to 12 product families is ideal to begin reviewing and to move from there. So this is the S&OP definition. I do have one that's a little bit more concatenated, but before I move on, George, anything you wanted to dive down into that was presented here on the formal definition that comes from the Association for Supply Chain Management?
No, I think that was great. I think we can move to our next slide that has a little diagram.
Here are the cliff notes. So,
Yes.
what is sales and operations planning? Well, it's really a structured process. And it's a structured process that aligns all functional areas of under a unified set of assumptions to enable and coordinate decision making. So, sales is at the table, marketing is at the table, finance is at the table, and operations is at the table. If I can give a little bit of nuance when we start talking about this overall definition, as we talk about alignment around assumptions, I will tell you, having been in operations, having participated in sales, and touching on the finance and other areas, oftentimes what we find without a structured process where we're all operating on the same assumptions is each of these entities are operating on different plans. So if we start thinking about operations, well, let's actually let's start at a different level. Let's start at the sales level. Sales oftentimes has goals, objectives, budgets that they're trying to accomplish, right? Oftentimes they're set. Sometimes there'll be a stretch goal, but this is the goal and the objective for the sales team. We're typically aligning that in most cases by product families, meaning, hey, our goal and objective this year is a 10% lift on this product family from last year's overall sales. Okay. And sales has that as a target. Okay, well, let's talk about marketing and their role in all of this. Marketing's role in all of this is to help support that increase in demand through various marketing activities that are going to influence potentially what happened to sales. So let's say we were operating last year and our sales came in at 10 million. They want to add another million to that overall sales, potentially in different product families, different mixes of SKUs that we have going forward. Well, marketing's role in all of this in a lot of cases is, hey, what are we going to do to influence demand in the marketplace? Is it capturing more market share? Is it promoting product, other activities that will influence how we're going to actually accomplish that 1.1 million? Finance, on the other hand, is responsible for saying, okay, I have a budget in place. I have a revenue plan in most cases, but I'm here to reconcile all of this. And by the way, finance is the one that's writing the checks as we begin executing on all of these other activities. From an S&OP perspective, operations is typically the entity that is left with executing to all of these plans. So operations sits in the back and they are going to be conducting the manufacturing. They're going to be ordering materials to support the manufacturing. They are going to be making sure that we're not late on any deliveries. They're also going to be managing the inventory to support these plans. In a lot of cases, operations, I will tell you, doesn't have clear direction from any of these individual entities. So maybe as a business, we're supporting a 10 or $11 million revenue goal this year. Sales, on the other hand, tend to be pretty optimistic. In a lot of cases, hey, I think we can reach 12 million this year. And finance, on the other hand, they typically want ranges. They typically want what's the worst case and what's the best case type of a scenario, so that we can accommodate that in the form of lines of credit, potentially cash requirements, all of these other things to support the business. So each of these entities has oftentimes a different lens and a different perspective upon which operations needs to execute. Operations, and by the way, my heart's kind of with the operations folks from the standpoint that I spent time in operations. I reported into a demand manager, a materials manager, and the manufacturing manager at different points in time. So in a lot of cases, operations is left in the absence of an S&OP process with having to decide which one of these do we execute to. Sales, by the way, never wants to be out of product. That's one of the goals, meaning if I'm going out and selling, I want availability out there. And they may not be too concerned about which products they're selling. So oftentimes in an S&OP process, there's this reconciliation around what's our approved product list? What are we going to be selling? And by the way, we make decisions too around the products that we can't be out of stock on and those that we're a little bit less, or we're okay with a little lower service level, meaning it's okay if this customer has to wait for a week or 2 weeks. It doesn't provide that, for instance, on that product, it may not provide the margin that we're looking for. Maybe it's a relatively low sales. Maybe it's a little bit more sporadic in demand. We don't get consistent ones. So we, as an operations team and as a finance team, may not be willing to manufacture enough of that product to guarantee a high service level. Sales, on the other hand, doesn't like hearing things like that. Sales wants the product available when the customer orders it, right? So we have all of these different views and different opinions, on how we want to operate. What the S&OP process does is align all of those assumptions so that we have one operating number that we all agree to. Okay? That's the bottom line on a good process. And so that operations knows where to execute. We document those assumptions. We document the downside. What if we don't make it? But by the way, we shouldn't be surprised when we're coming in at the end of the quarter, end of the year, when we go, hey, our overall goal was to be at 11 million. Maybe we came in at 10.5 million, for instance. Hopefully, in that S&OP processes, we've talked about best case, worst case, and expected case. So that's what this process does, is it aligns the organization, gets on the same assumptions. And in a lot of cases, it can help us remove a lot of the consternation and maybe I'm not going to say infighting, but the different opinions that will help influence, how we execute.
Oh, looking at that chart, Jeffrey, it takes me back to 2022 when I bought a new car or truck, and you'd see the advertisements. Go visit your local Ford dealer. You go visit, there'd be one truck on the lot. The lead times and just the coordination with that and setting expectations. I think we can feel for the operations people. Everyone else has these grand plans, but they're the ones who actually have to produce and have
exactly.
product that we can sell.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Jeffrey. So can we talk a little bit about the elements of a successful SIOP process? What are the building blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go directly into that. So I'm going to leverage in on a process diagram. And this process diagram I've taken directly from the Sales and Operations Planning, the How-To Handbook. This was written by Thomas F. Wallace and Robert Stahl. I was really fortunate in that Thomas actually came and spoke at our user conference. Oh, it must have been 12 to 14 years ago. He is considered in a lot of cases the grandfather of this process. It was originally developed and designed for manufacturing. So a little bit about the overall process. If you look at the lower left on this overall, in this overall picture, let's put this in the context of a monthly view. So the S&OP process historically is operated on a monthly. I mean, we've seen it operated on a more frequent basis. Weekly is another option for it as well. But the first step in this overall process is data gathering. So we come up here, it's at the end of August. One of the things that we do, we look at what we sold, we look at what we manufactured, we look at our demand plan that we had in place for August. We evaluate, did we actually accomplish it? Where were we off? Where were the product mixes and those types of things? So that data gathering is a really, really critical step in this whole process where we come out and we're prepared to begin evaluating what happened last month in preparation for the next month. So data gathering is a key element in all of this. This is where technology comes in place, right? And we'll talk about some of the pitfalls and things to watch out for, but technology can really assist us in step one. So step two, demand planning. So what is demand planning? Well, what we're doing in the demand planning phase is saying, okay, let's look at the sales. Let's look at sales actuals. What happened last month? Where did we deviate from what our plan was, right? We're also going to develop what we call a statistical forecast. A statistical forecast is essentially evaluating our data from the past. Ideally, we like to look at about 3 years of history. We look at things like the trend. What's the trend on each one of the individual products doing? Is it going up, going down, staying flat? We're looking for things like seasonality. And then the other thing that's a real key element in all of this during the statistical forecasting process is to assess our confidence in the overall forecast. Stated another way, what's the overall forecast error? The I in all of this process, the sales, inventory, and operations planning process, is a key element that really leverages on this step from the standpoint that we have goals and objectives to meet our customer service goals out in the marketplace, right? If we get a good handle on how confident we are within our planning phase, we can then make an assessment to say, by the way, this product, we don't have a lot of confidence in the forecast, but it's one of our key products. This will influence how much inventory we decide to carry on this product to meet that service objective. Obviously, if we want to guarantee high service and availability, but we don't have a lot of confidence in our forecast, it's going to require us to carry additional stock, right? So that's one of the outputs that comes from these phases. The other thing that we begin looking at is what are the production actuals? Hey, we had a plan that we were executing to. Were we able to actually execute to that? Or was this a source potentially of why we were unable to fill sales? Meaning, do we have back orders building up? So that first step in the process is really around the demand planning. The output from this is a management forecast, meaning, hey, we're going to reevaluate what are our thoughts with respect to what's going to be happening out over next month, the next 6 months, the next 9 months, the next year, for instance. Okay, that's step number 2. So all of this information then feeds into step number 3, which is the supply planning. The supply planning is saying, okay, we have a plan in place in here on what we want to accomplish from a sales perspective. 1, do we have the inventory in place to manufacture the goods that we have? 1, or 2, are we going to have to procure additional product, either in finished goods or if we're ordering to stock? Where are we going to get those products? And this is where we start getting into evaluating, are our suppliers able to meet our new requirements? Scenario, maybe over the last month, maybe we fell short on meeting our sales goals. We were running into constraints in the marketplace. Well, that's obviously something that we evaluate when we begin looking at our supply plan and any issues or constraints that might prevent us from reaching our goals and objectives, right? So that's a big deal for us in there. One of the things that I mentioned in that previous step is a consensus, meaning we think about demand planning, we think about establishing a management forecast that gets buy-in from all parties. This is the go-to plan. When we start seeing issues in the marketplace from a supply perspective, we don't go back and adjust the demand plan to account for constraints in the marketplace. We want to identify what could be sold if we're able to supply all that product, manufacture all the product, right? So this is oftentimes one of the steps where I see some failure with companies, which is the demand plan gets adjusted to the constraints in the marketplace. We really want to know what our plan is and our goals for selling, and then we begin addressing those constraints on the back end of the process. Okay? So third step in the process is the supply planning. Oftentimes in the supply planning, if we're in a manufacturing arena, maybe we have capacity constraints. This is where we begin evaluating, do we have the capacity to meet all of these requirements? By the way, when we begin looking at the supply planning phase, oftentimes we're looking out at a longer term horizon, meaning we have our immediate production plan for the next week, the next month, the next 2 months, but really addressing capacity related issues in a lot of cases, either supply and or manufacturing, we have to begin looking out 6 months, 9 months, or a year out in the process. So in this sales and operations planning process, oftentimes the minimum horizon that I typically see is typically around the 1 year, but oftentimes it's 18 months to 2 years is how we're operating in that. So step number 3 is supply planning. Okay, so by the way, all of these individual meetings, there is a facilitator that facilitates the S&OP process. that walks us along through each of these steps. They're typically timed, meaning data gathering needs to occur by the 3rd of the month. By the way, our demand planning meeting scheduled for the 5th working day of the month. Supply planning then has their opportunity to look at the demand plan. Maybe they're delivering that by the 7th day of the month and identifying constraints. That's when we get into what we call the pre-SNOP meeting. At the pre-SNOP meeting, we bring all of our findings together and we look to do things like conflict resolution, recommendations, look at the agenda for the executive management. So this isn't our final meeting, but we're typically bringing the heads of these organizations together, or those people who are preparing for it, to begin expressing those concerns in each of these individual areas, right? So this is preparing for that, the executive meeting. And sometimes what we're doing is, if we're off on product categories, we need to dive down into the details down below. We'll talk about this and kind of keys to making these processes work. But the last step in the process, and this is an hour meeting. This hour meeting is the CEO. It's all the C levels in the organization, and then the people that are supporting the SNOP process. This is typically where we arrive at our decision and our game plan. Now, recognize there's going to be some plans that we can execute. Hopefully, it's a majority, meaning we don't have constraints or issues with them. But we may be running into issues with cash flow constraints, meaning, hey, sales has identified opportunities. Can we support a 20% upside potentially on a product family because one of our competitors has failed? These are the types of things that get brought up during these high-level meetings where there's a finality to it, and the CEO is basically saying this is a stamp of approval, operations go execute, right? And this is the plan. This is the number that we are operating to. This is our revenue goal. This is our operations goal. And by the way, one of the other things that we're looking at here that can be a complicating process is operations speaks in units. Finance typically talks in revenue and in dollars. Sales typically talks in dollars. So we've got different units that are coming into this play. The other thing that can be oftentimes a challenge in this process is operations needs to know the mix of product that we're making. Sales is typically looking at a product family level. Maybe they've got 300 products that roll up into this product family, or maybe even 20. Well, they have a good sales plan for that product family, but what is the mix of the products that reside underneath it? Meaning, am I going to sell 50 of these or 40 of these or 30 of these? So operations is then left with resolving in a lot of cases, or the demand planning team is where, when we've translated that product family final plan down into the individual products that we're going to be manufacturing. So that is the process that we follow. I can tell you that there's some exceptions to it. Everybody has their unique process that they come in. It's something that gets incorporated into the organization, and there's uniquenesses based on the uniqueness of the business, right?
Thanks, Jeffrey. In your experiences in working with companies, what are some of the roadblocks that you have seen, that come up when trying to deploy a SIOP process, or what are some of the challenges you see to, ensuring a process will be successful? I mean, you hinted at some. I don't know if this challenges are more like mistakes that can be made, but I think
Yeah.
Mistakes, challenges. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's talk about the challenges, and let's talk about what I would consider to be number one. Do we have high level support at the C level? And that is the biggest one in all of this, meaning oftentimes there's energy at operations level to get a concise number that they can plan to. Bottom line, the CEO needs to be on board with this process and is going to support it. And this individual has this executive meeting on their calendar and they don't miss it. That's the ultimate support, meaning I am always operating on the 8th day of business of the month. I'm not out of town. I have got this SNOP executive meeting on my calendar. I don't miss it. So that's the very first one, right? The other one is the data gathering. Oftentimes what we're finding is in the data gathering phase, a lot of companies will start with spreadsheets. It's an easy way to get going in the absence of what we would call a proper demand planning or supply chain planning system or SIOP process, right? Or SIOP system. And they'll start with spreadsheets. What we find oftentimes is the amount of time that it takes to create, pull all of the data from the various sources to aggregate it to support the various meetings can break down quite easily. That is those are two of the biggest challenges that we find in the overall process. CEO, you don't have CEO support, doesn't make the meetings, isn't on a calendar, doesn't buy into it, the process will fail. On the front end, it's that data gathering process. The other things that we typically experience when implementing SIOP is consistency, right? We get together and we work through. Oftentimes you'll notice up in here conflict resolution. We'll run into conflict oftentimes in steps 2, 3, and 4. Do we have good processes in place that allow us to work through our differences and arrive at a common set of assumptions that we're agreeing to? I would tell you coming into it, if you don't have those things behind it, you need to figure out how to get them in place.
Okay. Any other parting words that you have?
I do, George.
We got a couple
Yeah.
of minutes left, so
Okay. Yeah, let's take a look here. I have actually some of the key elements in here, and oftentimes this isn't how people operate, but if you have thoughts on getting into a process, into an SNLP process, I would tell you a product family demand plan is probably a really good place to start. So when we create that demand plan, which is right after step number 1, data gathering, we need a sales plan. By the way, this is likely coming together in revenue. We need a marketing plan, likely a revenue-based. Customer forecast oftentimes come in units. Statistical forecasts. So if you don't have a good statistical planning system in place, this is, by the way, oftentimes a baseline that allows us to analyze history and take an impartial view, look at where biases exist. All of this information helps us create a demand plan, oftentimes down to the individual SKU level. And that all needs to be able to be rolled up by a forecast by a product family in all those different revenues, right? Or those different units of measure. So we need a dollarized number, we need a unit-based number, and we need to be able to aggregate and disaggregate. So what am I talking about? Well, sales plans oftentimes come in at a product family level. They typically come in dollars. Well, operations needs that in a unit-based expressed on an individual SKU. This is oftentimes where the statistical forecast will help us identify what that forecast is going to be for that SKU. So in here, when you think about setting up, if you have good organization on your product families, good rule of thumb is anywhere from 6 to 12. If you get more product families than that, it's difficult to work through the process and that 1-hour executive meeting at the end of the month. So that's one of the key elements. Comments, questions on that, George?
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Let's talk about this other one. There was that infamous I that came into SIOP. So really, what is it? It's on-hand inventory in dollars by planning group projected over time. This is a key element for us when we begin thinking about financing our plans, right? So the finance component needs to understand what the requirements are going to be to support these plans that we have in place. So we're putting a stake in the ground on what we're going to be operating to next month, the next 3, 6, 12 months. Well, there's an association typically with an inventory in there, meaning we're going to be procuring more inventory to manufacture with. Maybe we're doing more build to stock and other components. So I would tell you the ability to project on-hand inventory in dollars by the planning group projected over time is a key element. And that's another one, but a rolled up view that allows us to aggregate and disaggregate so we can get down at what are the SKUs we're going to have issues with? What are the ones maybe we're overstocked? So just wanted to throw that in. That's another key element. One of the component too, if I can go back into it, technology is a facilitator of an S&OP process. We talked back here in the overall plan on the data gathering. I talked about the spreadsheets. If we don't have a good platform in place, a good ERP that can deliver the information, if we don't have a good a good planning system that can deliver this information rolled up and disaggregated quickly. Because what goes on in these steps up in here is we oftentimes iterate between different plans, right? Meaning, hey, what if we bump this by 10%? What if we brought it down by 15? What are the resulting impacts? The technology allows us to go through there and simulate through a number of steps. So technology can be your friend in all of this and enable that process.
Excellent. Well, Jeffrey, we appreciate your time today. All our audience members, if you would like to learn more or have any questions, please let us know. We would be happy to continue the conversation, but we are at time. So thank you.
Thank you, George. I certainly appreciate you and Stoneridge supporting this, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You as well.